Hello fear seekers, and welcome back to the channel. Have you ever had the uncanny feeling that someone you know isn't who they claim to be? Perhaps the fact that you've been running into them so often lately is purely coincidental. There's nothing to be suspicious of, right? Today, we're going to be diving into some disturbing, allegedly true, stalker horror stories. Now, it is a dream of mine to read subscriber horror stories someday. With that in mind, I'd ask that you subscribe to the channel and like the video so we can make that happen together. If you have any scary stories from your own life, feel free to submit them to the email in the description. I would be honored to read them. Now without further ado, sit back. Keep an eye out for that strange person you've been seeing around lately, and get ready to ferment your fears. A few years ago, I was working as a healthcare assistant at the hospital, and recently having moved out of my dad's home, I had started renting a small, detached home in the countryside. I had one neighbor on this street, a man in his late 30s, who I will call Jake. He was single and lived alone. My first encounter with Jake was when I was moving in. My dad couldn't accompany me on my first day of moving in due to his work schedule, so I was unpacking by myself. Jake walked up to me, introduced himself, and offered to help with moving my heavy items. I'm a very small woman, so I appreciated the help. My first impressions were that he was very kind, open, and polite. He chatted to me about his job, told me that he liked to play instruments and write in his spare time, and we bonded over both loving the band Tool, and we both enjoyed playing the bass. The next day, I brought him some beer as a thank you. He wasn't in, however, so I left it by his front door and included a thank you note for all the previous help the day prior. Over the next few weeks as I settled in, Jake would pop by. We'd chat about music, discuss shared hobbies, drink beer, and occasionally even watch movies together. I was new to the area and didn't have many friends yet, so we helped provide some social interaction outside of my job. But, as you can already tell, things didn't stay so good. I got home one evening to see a basket full of flowers on my doorstep, and an included card which read that this was from Jake, and he wanted to speak with me when I had the time. I walked inside with the basket. I didn't even get a chance to put it down before I heard knocking at my door. It was around 11 p.m., and I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the window next to the door to see Jake waving at me. I opened the door, and that's the first time I can recall where I started to feel uneasy around him. He asked me if I saw the basket and if I liked it. He asked to come in, but I said something along the lines of how tired I was after work and that we should speak tomorrow. He didn't say anything for a few seconds before he asked if I would want to grab a coffee with him before work tomorrow. I said sure and closed the door. The next morning, we grabbed coffee at a Costa that was close to the hospital I worked at. He seemed very excited and giddy. Soon after, he asked me to be his girlfriend. I had to decline, as we had only known each other for a few weeks, and, well, he was significantly older than me. He suddenly dropped his cheery demeanor, as if he had become someone else in a matter of seconds. He grabbed his things and left, saying only that he had to go to work. I went to work too, and tried not to think too much on it. I had to work overtime that night, and started heading home at around midnight. When I pulled up to my home, I saw Jake sitting on my doorstep. I really didn't want to get out of my car, but I did, and walked up to him. He started off politely asking if I had thought over his proposal. I said no, that I'm sorry, but I'm not interested. Once again, as if a switch had flipped, he went off on me, calling me spoiled and ungrateful. I was scared at that point and asked him to leave. He wouldn't. I managed to get to my car with him following me and showed him through the window that I'm calling the police. He swore at me and left. I didn't call the police that night. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, thinking he was just frustrated. One of my biggest regrets is not calling them. The next morning, I found wildflowers that looked like they were picked from a garden at my front door, as well as a post-it with the word sorry and a sad face drawn on it. At work that day, I was called by the nurse in charge, who took me aside saying my boyfriend was here to see me. As it's urgent, she also told me to tell my boyfriend that he should not come to see me at work again, especially since I wasn't on break, as it's unprofessional. It was Jake. He wanted to ask if I had gotten his flowers and message. I went off on him, saying things along the lines of how dare he come to my work, get me in trouble no less, pose as my boyfriend. All this took place in the canteen. He didn't say anything, didn't apologize. I told him to knock it off and I left. Things only got worse from there. He would often wait for me when I got home, try to bribe me with gifts, more flowers. He even went as far as to get me a new guitar. I accepted nothing and always left everything where he put them. I eventually broke down to my dad, who asked if I wanted him to speak to Jake. I said no. He offered for me to move back with him, but I had too much pride and declined. My dad was really worried about me. One day, everything came to a halt when I came home to my front door ajar, though not broken. My front room looked absolutely ransacked. I ran to my car and called the police. Nothing was missing. Absolutely nothing. But my front room, kitchen, and bedroom were all rummaged through. I told the police I had an inkling it was Jake, who they ended up questioning, but his friend vouched for him and said they were together that evening, so it couldn't have been Jake. I still don't believe that. I tried to tell the police everything that had been happening with Jake, and how I was starting to feel very unsafe. However, I had no proof but the notes he had left me, which weren't threatening. So since there was no threat to life or well-being, they literally could not do anything. My dad helped me clean everything up, and I had my locks changed. Jake actually left me alone for a little while after that. I started looking for new places to live around that time. Then one evening, I had come home, ate some food, showered, and went to bed. Only to be awoken, I'm not sure when, to somebody standing in my doorway. I didn't move. I remember originally thinking I was having a sleep paralysis episode, but after moving my fingers, I realized I was fully awake, with a dark figure clearly standing in my doorway. My phone was under my pillow, so I rolled over to my side, pretending to still be asleep, and I just waited, with my hand under my pillow on my phone. There was no way I could call the police without alerting the person in my doorway. Eventually, I could hear the footsteps fade, and I called the police, only telling them my address and that someone just broke into my home, and I think that they're still there. I got out of bed, grabbed the keys on my nightstand, and got out of the house by going out of the window and bolting it to my car. I had on a tank top and shorts. I didn't even have shoes on, which made driving horrible. I saw him then when I was pulling out, standing in the kitchen, through the window. It was Jake. I had a small essential oil diffuser next to the window that shined enough light to be able to tell who the figure was. I drove as I spoke to the police. I remember just completely detaching from reality, at least that's what it felt like. I drove to my dad's house. After looking over my house, the police drove to my dad's home where I was. I told them everything about Jake, how he's been following me, coming to my work, waiting for me when I got home, and now I was 100% sure he had broken into my home and was planning to do God knows what. I was told that they found my front door locked when they got there, and went to knock on Jake's door. He answered and looked as if he had just woken up. They asked him some questions and left him alone. It is so unimaginably hard to prove that you're being stalked in the UK. I managed to get a restraining order on the grounds of harassment, with proof that he had come to my workplace posing as my boyfriend, and a co-worker who could support me in this as she had overheard our conversation, where I had asked him to stop following me. I had also saved some texts he sent me, where I asked how he got my number, and told him to stop contacting me, but he went on to send some vaguely threatening messages along the lines of, "I'll be waiting when you come home today." Which, along with the workplace incident, as well as the fact that I had mentioned Jake to the police when my house was broken into, managed to get me my restraining order. I went back to that house once, with my dad and his friend, to gather up all my things. I did not see Jake that time, or ever again for that matter. I had to transfer workplaces back to my original workplace as I moved back in with my dad. I'm now moved away and live alone again, trying to put the past behind me, but this type of thing definitely messed a little with me. I had to get some therapy and found it difficult to develop friendships, especially romantic relationships. He somewhat ruined that for me. I've not made any new friends since, never had a boyfriend either. I find it very hard to trust people outside of work colleagues and family. This all started when I was in my first year of college, so around 4 or 5 years ago. And while it may not be the most terrifying story involving a stalker that exists, it's one of those things that happened to me that I genuinely will never get over. Honestly, I still sometimes get chills and anxiety thinking about this whole situation, and I know that sounds dramatic, but living it is a lot different than reading it. While I was a freshman at my college, I was also working as a junior admin assistant for a medium-sized corporation, basically doing whatever it was that the admins and their assistants asked of me. In essence, I was assistant to the assistants, so I was super low on that totem pole. It wasn't a bad job, though some of the people were a bit rude. I kind of think it had more to do with the corporate environment than them as people, though they could have all just been a-holes. Hard to say. One of my weekly duties was restocking what was essentially the office supply stand. The company had an open floor plan, and in the center of the third and top floor was a cubicle segment that was filled with office supplies that people could freely take. It was basically an honor system, though there was a camera directly above the cubicle, and one of my jobs was to get the supplies from the closet and make sure that the pens and post-its and whatnot were all full and ready for people. It wasn't a hard task, honestly. It was just meticulous and took a lot of time. The week that all this started, I was stocking the supplies and was approached by an employee that I didn't know. He looked a bit nerdy, had a bowl cut, thick glasses. Not trying to be rude or poke fun at nerdy people, just saying that he kinda looked the stereotype. Anyways, he walked up to the cubicle and kind of just stared at me. After a moment, I realized that I was probably blocking whatever it was that he wanted, and maybe he just really didn't want to talk to me. I apologized and asked what I could get for him, just trying to be polite and keep my head down. He responds with, "I don't think I've seen you here. Are you new?" I was a bit confused, as I'd been there for around a month, but maybe he didn't get up to the third floor very often. "I've been here for about a month. I'm a junior admin assistant. My name's Callie." Again, trying to be polite, but not overstepping. "I'm Peter. I work in desktop support." He put his hand out to shake mine, which felt kind of weird considering what I was occupied with, and how this conversation had started. But again, maybe he was just bad with people. Very nice to meet you, Peter. Is there anything I can help you with?" I shook his hand quickly and turned back to finishing my stocking. He kind of chuckled and mumbled something under his breath. I just let it go and went back to stocking. He stood there the entire time I was putting things in the cubicle, which I obviously thought was a bit weird, but again, it was what it was. As I finished up, I stepped out and put the remaining extras on the cart to put back in the closet. I told him it was very nice to chat with him and that I hoped he had a great day. He smiled and told me he'd see me around. Overall, I thought it was nothing. He was awkward, but harmless. I expected nothing to come of this situation beyond me having to potentially say hi to him if I saw him in the future. Then the next week rolled around. I was doing my supply stocking and sure enough, Peter walked up to the cubicle, this time holding a box of donuts. I paused for a moment and watched him walk up, then open the box. The whole time he had a goofy grin on his face and was staring at me. I never thought a man walking up with a box of donuts could manage to look creepy. But there we were, and there he was, looking incredibly creepy. He asked me if I wanted a donut, and I was polite and took one, and placed it on a post-it note in the cubicle, because I had nothing else to put it on. I said thank you, and he just continued to stand there and stare at me without saying anything for several moments. So I did the worst thing I could possibly do. I asked him how things were. In my mind, I was just being polite, trying to make small talk. He then asked me what I'm doing that weekend, out of nowhere. He didn't answer my question, he just literally jumped into asking me out. I kind of laughed at him a bit when he asked. It was completely unintentional, he just caught me off guard. I politely told him that I had a fiancé. His smile kind of fell into a half frown, but he kept his awkward stare. After a few moments, he put the donuts down in the cubicle and turned to walk away. I honestly had no idea how to take any of this, so I just decided to move on and ignore it. The next day, I was at my desk and trying to book a flight for one of the C-level employees when I feel a hand on my shoulder. I literally jumped, and damn near screamed when it happened. I turned to see who the hell it was, and to my surprise, it was Peter. Even more to my surprise, he had gotten a haircut, and he didn't look quite as nerdy as he had before. He apologized for scaring me, and said that he just wanted to apologize for how awkward he had been the day before, and that he had stepped out of line when he asked. His tone, his manner of speaking to me, and his overall demeanor was completely different, and he seemed sincere. I told him it was fine, and that we all have our awkward moments. He then tells me that he had something for me, but that it had nothing to do with the situation before. He then pulls out a gift card to Red Lobster out of his pocket and places it on my desk, and follows it up by saying, "I promise, this has nothing to do with yesterday. I just got this for my birthday a couple weeks back, and I'm allergic to shellfish, so I'd rather it go to someone that could use it." It was a nice gesture, and I appreciated it, so I told him thank you, and then told him that I was actually talking to my sister about wanting to get together to go to Red Lobster recently, so it was perfect timing. He just kind of laughed it off, and told me that he hoped I had a good time, and then left. This interaction was completely different from the other two times. The rest of the week goes by, and my sister and I had actually made plans to go have lunch, then see a movie afterwards. We used the gift card, then went to the movies. As we were leaving, who else did we run into but Peter? At first, my mind was freaking out, thinking about how awkward he was and how much I didn't want to deal with it. But then our last interaction came to mind, and I thought the least I could do was thank him. He saw me and walked over. We said hi. I introduced him to my sister, told her that he was a coworker, and that he had been the one that gave me the gift card that we had had lunch on. There were a couple moments of idle chat, then we all went our separate ways. It wasn't until we got to the car that my sister pointed out that Peter had the same haircut as my fiancé, and dressed the same. It was a bit out of nowhere, and at first I had to think about it, but I just told her that it wasn't an uncommon look for guys. Honestly, it wasn't too crazy to think that more than one guy would have the same look. She wasn't wrong. They both had their hair shaved on the sides and back, but long on the top pushed to the side. The clothing thing I couldn't really speak on because I didn't see it. I ignored it and moved on. Over the next couple weeks, a few more strange things happened that had me a little curious. I would be talking to my sister over Facebook Messenger about craving chocolate-covered strawberries. The next morning, Peter walked in with a box of chocolate-covered strawberries, and he would say that they were for anyone that wanted them, but he wanted to see if I wanted them first. I was talking to her about Game of Thrones, and then Peter would bring up how much he loved Game of Thrones out of nowhere. I would read a story on Google News, and Peter would casually mention something that was related to the story. As those 2 weeks pushed on, everything was just too strange, and I was kind of feeling like he was watching me, and just waiting for me to do anything so he could bring it up and make it seem like he was also interested. Despite our few friendly chats, I pretty much stopped talking to him, and had fallen back into that he's a bit of a creep mentality. Then, the text messages started. It was Monday, and I was doing my stalking, just waiting for Peter to show up and make things weird again, when my phone went off. I looked to see what it was, and it was a text that said, "Hey, it's Peter. I just wanted to let you know I won't be in today. I'm not feeling well." Not only did I not know how the hell he got a hold of my phone number, I didn't know why he was texting me. I simply responded with, "This is Callie. I think you texted the wrong person." He replied saying that he meant to tell me because he didn't want me to worry? I just put my phone away and decided to not even bother replying. He started texting me good morning every single day after that. I responded once or twice, but after that I just started to ignore him. Another Monday rolls around and he walked up to the supply cubicle with a smile on his face. I sigh and brace myself for another conversation with this guy that was just not getting it. He then pulls a small jewelry box from his pocket and opens it. It has 2 earrings in it that look like they're legitimate, real pearls, and he asked me if I wanted them. I asked why the hell he was trying to give me pearl earrings, and he responded saying that his mom bought them for his sister, but she didn't like them, so he said he would give them to someone that would like them. I just stood there and stared at him for several moments before my brain just snapped. I sat down on the desk of the cubicle and took a deep breath before basically telling Peter that he needed to back off, and that while he was a nice guy, I was engaged, and that he wasn't going to get anywhere with me. I'm sure I said more, and I'm sure I was a bit more aggressive, but that's the gist of it. His smile faded, and he honestly looked like he was about to cry. He closed the box and put it back in his pocket. Then he stared me straight in the eyes and said, "What does Brian have that I don't? I look better than him. I have a better job than him. I can give you anything you want, and yet you still won't give me a chance? I'm a nice guy, and I don't know why you don't see that." He then turned around and stormed off. I had no idea how to take this. I had never told him my fiance's name. He should have no idea what my fiancé did for a living, nor what he looked like. I know what some of you might be thinking. I mentioned Facebook earlier, and maybe he got the info off that. But that wouldn't have been possible. I have my Facebook locked down to the point that you can't see anything, or pretty much even find me, unless I add you as a friend. Brian's is locked down the same way. There was no way he could have really found either of us. Then a thought hit me. Peter was in desktop support, and he had access to my work computer. He seemed to know everything I was doing on that system, and he seemed to know everything I was talking about to people I talked to on Facebook. To make a longer story short, I called someone from the information security team up and I explained the whole situation to him. I told him about how Peter was acting creepy. I told him that he seemed to know everything I was doing on my system at all times, and about the situation that morning. At first, I'm not sure if he was that interested, but it wasn't until I told him about the Facebook conversations that he seemed to change to taking it seriously. He asked me if I had ever logged into my Facebook on my work computer. I unfortunately had to tell him that I had, and that I knew I wasn't supposed to. He said he didn't care about that. He asked me to open Facebook on my phone, and we went through to the spot in the security settings where you can see all of the open sessions. He told me to do the forced logout of every session, so I did. After a few moments, we refreshed it, and, sure enough, there was a session that was connected that wasn't my phone. He asked me to grab my laptop and come with him, which led to me having a meeting with the chief security officer about the situation. I was nervous as hell, but he clearly had an idea of what was going on. The end result of these conversations and a very brief investigation, Peter, being in desktop support, had remotely installed remote access software on my system, as well as a keylogger. When they went down to talk to him, they found that he had a browser open and was logged into my Facebook account, because he had gotten my password. He had every single photo from my Facebook downloaded and in a folder on the computer. He had the software running and was watching what I was doing on my work computer at all times. He had been watching the conversations, watching what I was searching, and he was apparently taking notes. Over a couple of months, Peter had almost literally started a personality file on me, and was doing everything he could to become someone I would get with. He, of course, tried to tell them that what he was doing with the remote software was legitimate so that he could give tech support if I needed it, but when they asked him about why he was logged into my personal Facebook, he didn't have an answer. Thankfully, Peter was fired. I worked there for another few months, but then decided that I wanted to move on to something else. This was a few years ago, and thankfully I haven't heard from Peter since, and I genuinely hope I never have to see his face again. This is one of the stories that, honestly, causes me a good amount of mental distress, but it's also one of those stories that I need to tell, either to an audience or a therapist, to get out of my own head. This all happened back in high school. It was actually the second semester of my junior year. I was a bit of a loner back then, and had never really had an actual girlfriend or relationship, and was frequently teased by my friends for it. Like most high school guys, I had my crushes and girls that I wanted to get with, but none of them showed any interest in me until I met Cheryl. Cheryl was, in the best way I can think to describe her, the goth girl in our school that no one else wanted to mess with. She had a clique of friends, and the popular kids would talk about her behind her back, but they never said anything to her face. She and I had spoken some before, and she seemed like a pretty okay person as far as previous experiences with her went. Maybe a bit abrasive, but easy to talk to. I'll never know how it initially happened, but someone gave Cheryl my Snapchat name, and I know this because one night she randomly sent me a snap that was a picture of a dog, and it said something like, "What's up, loser?" I thought it was one of my friends at first, so I responded with a picture of my Xbox controller, said I was playing Halo, and asked who it was. I remember the person had their name set to something like Cherry Black, instead of their real name. Immediately after, she sends me a picture of herself. I was legitimately confused. I had no idea why she was Snapchatting me. I think I replied with something like, "Wow, you must be pretty damn bored to have to talk with me," and to pick on myself, just in case she thought I was someone else. Then she replies and says, "No, I actually want to talk to you." We had a decent conversation over Snap, until I was too tired to stay up. She threw in her aggressive quips, calling me a loser every once in a while, making jokes at my expense. But honestly, I didn't mind. It wasn't anything my group of childhood friends didn't already do, and she wasn't being malicious with it. From there, we actually spoke a few times at school, sat together at lunch, and started sitting by each other during American history, which was the only class we had together. Honestly, I think I was a bit in awe, because she was actually a really cool person, and she became a really good friend over the couple of weeks that we got to know each other. Then one day, I got a text from her that said, "Hey, you're my boyfriend now." I laughed it off and responded with, "Oh, is there a guy that you're trying to let down easy and you need a stand-in?" I didn't expect it, but she responded with, "No, I'm telling you that you're my boyfriend now, and I'm your girlfriend. We're dating now." It was kind of an odd way of doing things, but I also wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. She was telling me that she and I were together, and that was that. Obviously, I thought that this was going to be some kind of messed up prank at first, but when I got to school the next day and saw her, she immediately started to make out with me, and I think it was then that I realized she was being serious. Again, she was obviously a bit more aggressive with it than I anticipated, but hey, I had a girlfriend. I was no longer a lonely loser. Things went pretty well for about a week. Nothing crazy happened, and I was pretty happy. Then the first red flag came into the picture. I posted a picture on my Snapchat story of myself and my older sister. It was a completely innocent picture that I mostly posted for family and friends for the fun of it. About 10 minutes after posting it, I get a text from Cheryl with a screenshot of my Snap story and my sister's face circled in red, like she loaded the picture into the editor on her phone and drew circles around her. The picture had a text with it that simply said, "Who's she?" I replied, "That's my sister." She then responds, "What's your sister's name?" I was a bit taken aback by how aggressive she was being about a snap with my sister, but I relented and told her, "Her name is Amanda." About 5 minutes or so later, she responds with, "Okay," and a smiley emoji. That same night, I got a random text from my sister that said something to the effect of, "Your girlfriend is so cute, you should have told me that you were with her." I asked how she knew, and she responds by telling me that Cheryl had added her on Facebook and messaged her asking if she was actually my sister. Obviously, I had a problem with this, so the next day I asked her why she did that. She responds by saying, "I had to make sure that you were serious about being with me, plus I'm your girlfriend. I should get to know your sister so we can do stuff together in the future." By the time this had happened, we had been dating for around 8 or 9 days, and she was being that aggressive about a snap with my sister? Again, this was my first girlfriend, and I was 17, so while this was a bit odd to me, I just let it go because maybe that's how relationships just were sometimes? Overall, things seemed to go alright for another few weeks. Then, there was one day where I was at lunch and talking with my cousin Anne. Cheryl walked up to us and basically grabbed me and forced me into kissing her. It was kind of strange, but I didn't do much to stop it. Afterwards, I kind of just laughed at how awkward the whole thing must have been for Anne. I cleared my throat and then said, Anne, this is my girlfriend Cheryl. We've been together for almost a month." Cheryl just kind of stared at her and then reached out to shake her hand, saying hi with a very stale tone. Anne could sense the animosity, so she excused herself, after which Cheryl shifted her angry stare to me and asked me who Anne was. I explained that she and I had been friends since we were kids, and that her mom married my mom's brother, so she was my cousin by marriage. At first, Cheryl seemed to be accepting of my response. Then, after school, I got a text from her that said, "I've been thinking about it, and you're not going to talk to Anne anymore." I didn't respond. Fast forward another week, and Anne, my cousin that I wasn't supposed to be talking to, got a job at the sandwich shop that I was working at, which is what we had been talking about that morning. My boss was a really cool manager, and I was able to talk him into hiring her, and I told him that I would train her. I'd been there a few months, so I was basically assistant manager without the official title. That night was Anne's first shift, and after he got all of her on-board paperwork done, he told me good luck and to call him if I needed anything, then left. We were about an hour and a half into the shift, and it was slow, so I decided that I would sit down at one of the tables and talk to Anne about how closing shifts worked, how to fill out the cleaning checklist, and just the overall basics. We were talking for about 5 minutes before my phone went off. It was a text from Cheryl. I opened it and it literally said, "I thought I told you not to talk to her anymore." Obviously, I was confused. We were at work, and working. 1, how did she know I was talking to her? And 2, was she really going to be so controlling that she didn't want me speaking with my own cousin, who was a coworker that I was tasked with training? I told Anne to take a few minutes for a break, grab a drink, and that I would be right back. I stepped out into the parking lot and, sure enough, Cheryl was sitting in her car, facing the restaurant. I went over to her car and she rolled down her window. I asked what the hell she was doing. She told me that she didn't want me to talk to Anne anymore. I told her that I didn't have a choice and that she was my cousin. After some back and forth and a short argument, I just gave up on the conversation and went back inside. I thought that this was the end of this annoyance, but sure enough, it wasn't. The next shift that Anne and I worked, which was 2 days after this event, I walked in and my manager asked me to come to his office. I stepped in and I could tell that he was upset with me for something, though I had no idea what it was. I asked him what was going on, and he told me that apparently Cheryl had called him and told him that he needed to fire Anne because she and I weren't supposed to talk to each other. She told him some really messed up and elaborate story about how, when we were younger, I had sexually assaulted her, and that I was controlling her. Basically that I was grooming her since she was about 2 years younger than me. I was appalled at this. I obviously told him it wasn't true, that I had no idea what the hell she was talking about, and that I would be willing to sit in with Anne so she could tell him that it was all a lie. He honestly seemed uncomfortable about this, which was really bizarre to me. He told me that he had temporarily suspended Anne, but that he hadn't told her the reason, and that she would be coming back in 2 weeks, and that I needed to sort it all out before then. I honestly had no idea what I was supposed to do to sort it out, but I agreed, and just tried to get through my shift. I completely ignored Cheryl at school the next day. She tried to approach me and I completely shut her down. After class, and before I had to be at work, I met up with Anne, and I told her about what was happening. She was just as shocked as I was about all of this, and asked what we should do. I basically told her that we needed to just ignore Cheryl, and that it would help if she could talk to our boss without me around, and explain that the whole thing was a lie. A while after this conversation, when I was driving to work, I got a text from Cheryl. It said, "I thought I made it clear that I didn't want you talking to Anne." I'd had enough. I called her. The conversation was quick, but it was pretty much me breaking up with her, telling her to back off and to leave me alone. She then said something that actually gave me chills. She said, "You don't get to break up with me. I don't think you realize that I call the shots." I then told her that she was absolutely nuts and that she needed to get help, and hung up on her. As I'm sure you can guess, especially when dealing with obsessively crazy people like Cheryl, this is where things started to get worse. That night, while I was working at the sandwich shop, I kept getting weird looks from customers as they walked in, and some customers that were walking toward the door would turn around and leave before they actually entered. Thankfully, one of my friends had decided to come by and get food. He got to the counter and asked what was going on with the woman outside. I asked what he was talking about. He then proceeded to tell me probably the most horrific thing I'd ever been told. Apparently Cheryl was outside and telling people that a sexual assaulter worked there, and that no one should support a company that employed one. She was literally telling people as they were walking up that I was a sexual assaulter and that I was free because no one believed her. She had been standing outside the entire shift and was saying this to people as they walked up. I couldn't see her because she was just off to the side of the window. I told my friend to hold on and stepped outside. Sure enough, she was standing there. I asked her what she was doing and why she was doing it, and she started to scream, "Hey everyone, this is the guy. This is the man that should be in jail." I told her to leave and she just smirked at me and said, "Make me." So I did. I called the police and told them that she was trespassing, and I called my manager to tell him what was going on. The police showed up and told her that she needed to leave. They came in and asked for my information, and I gave it to them, then told me that she was advised to not return to the property or she would be arrested for trespassing. Of course, just because she wasn't allowed on the property didn't mean that she couldn't continue to do damage. It was a day or two later when my manager once again called me into his office. Thinking that I had taken care of the situation with Cheryl, I went in without thinking anything of it. When I get in, he had my file on his desk, and a paycheck in an envelope, as well as the Google review screen up on his computer. He then proceeds to tell me that he was advised by the regional manager that he needed to let me go. I asked what was going on. He then shows me the screen. The store's Google rating had been tanked, and there were a significant number of 1-star reviews that mentioned the store was employing a sexual criminal, and that no one should support this business until they fired him. Some of them even mentioned me by name. My boss basically told me that, while he didn't really believe the whole thing, it was bad press for the business, and that he had no choice. His boss was telling him to let me go to fix this problem. In the end, I signed the document, gave them my hat and apron, and took my check. I think the hardest part of this was trying to explain to my parents why I had been fired. I'd been working there for about a year at this point, and was probably the only person that had stuck around for so long, so to tell my parents that I was fired honestly hurt me. I had to tell my mother that I was being fired because my ex-girlfriend was claiming things that simply weren't true. I, of course, told her it was all a lie, and that Cheryl and I were never even intimate, and that she was trying to just mess with me. Obviously, they weren't really sure what to do, other than possibly call the police and have them sort it out. But really, I'm not even sure if she was committing an actual crime. None of the review bomb reviews had her name on them. She left the property when she was asked to do so, and unfortunately there was a ton of plausible deniability on her side. My other thought was about whether or not she would be willing to lie to the police as well and have me arrested, then drag it all out in a horrible legal battle. In the end, I just told my parents that I was sorry this happened, and that I would try to find another job. Obviously, they were telling me not to be sorry, but I honestly felt like this was my fault. I went to bed and just kind of sank into a bit of a low mentality. The next morning, I woke up to my dad coming into my room and asking if there was anything wrong with the car when I drove home from work the night before. We shared the car since he worked an early shift and was home by the time I needed it to go to work. I told him that everything was fine on the way home the night before and asked what he was talking about. He told me to come outside and see. I went with him and, come to find out, both tires on the driver's side were flat. I was just standing there and staring at the car, thinking that Cheryl had to have done this. I obviously couldn't prove it was her, and there was no actual damage to the tires. The air was let out through the valve stem, but I had this hunch that this was more of her trying to get to me. I apologized to my dad, but I also told him that I had no idea because all 4 tires were fine when I was driving home the night before. He believed me, but I think my face was showing that I had an idea about what had happened. A few more days go by. I'm basically just floating through the motions and trying to move forward with things. When out of nowhere, I get called to the guidance counselor's office. I head down, and they sit me down. Then the counselor tells me that they got a report that I was suicidal, and that I had supposedly told one of my friends that I was going to bring a gun to school in order to do suicide by cop. I obviously vehemently denied this. It was nowhere near true, and I would have never said anything like that. He then told me that even though I was a good student, and even though I was denying it, they would have to send me home for a few days on suspension, and that they would have to go through my locker while I was gone, and that I would be required under policy to have my bags searched and be walked through the metal detector every morning for a while, until they believed that the threat was cleared. Once again, I was in a position where I had to explain to my parents what happened, since my mom had to leave work to come pick me up from the guidance office. I told her that Cheryl was out to get me, and that she was doing everything in her power to ruin my life. I think, at first, that she was a bit iffy on believing me, but then I literally burst into tears, and I think that may have been what hit it home for her that something was going on. I told her that, while I was dating Cheryl, she was super controlling. I told her about all the red flags, about how she flipped out on me for talking to my cousin, and how she freaked out when I had a picture of my sister on Snapchat. I told her about what she did at my work, and how she was the one that filed the complaint with my boss, and most likely the one that had review bombed the store. I pretty much just unloaded everything on my mom because I had felt like my life had just fallen apart over a girl that I didn't even like before she decided that we were dating about a month and a half ago. Looking back, it was all so stupid that it happened like it did, and it all happened so quickly, going from friends to dating, to me feeling like everything was ruined. I could see why I was so upset. My mom ended up telling me to take the time off and that she would talk to the counselor about what was going on, and that I should just take this as a much needed mental health break. I agreed and decided I would just sit at home and do nothing for a few days, just enjoying some time to myself. But first, for some reason, something in my mind told me that I needed to message Cheryl and try to get her to leave me alone. So I did. I literally texted her and said, "Look, I know that things got complicated between us. I said things to upset you, but could you please just leave me alone and stop doing all of this? I get your point, you're in control, but please just leave me be and move on." She replied pretty quick, but it wasn't a good reply. She said something to the effect of, "Okay, I'll move on to Anne then. How's that sound?" I immediately contacted Anne to tell her, and she told me that she would keep a lookout. I really didn't know how far Cheryl would take it since, while she hadn't done anything violent or aggressive towards me, she had still managed to really screw things up for me in a relatively short amount of time. To be safe, I actually called my uncle and explained to him what she had done, and that she was now targeting Anne. And honestly, this was probably one of the best things I think I could have done. My uncle, my mom's brother, and Anne's stepfather, is a bit of a security nerd. He has cameras all over his property, and he knows how to protect himself. My warning actually put him on edge, and led to what happened next. As expected, Cheryl started to go after Anne, and trying to cause her problems. She started by trying to start a fight in school with her by talking badly about me. Anne just told her that she wasn't listening and walked away. When Cheryl tried to follow her, Anne made it a point to walk toward one of the security guards and stand there, knowing that Cheryl wouldn't do anything. There were a couple other things that she tried that I honestly cannot remember, but it's not really important. It's more important to know that she spent a few days trying to make Anne's life hell, and Anne wasn't letting it happen. Then, Cheryl made a huge mistake and decided to escalate. The night it all ended, Cheryl had decided that she was going to try to throw a brick through the glass pane on the front door of Anne's house. Unfortunately for Cheryl, when she decided to do this, my uncle was in the garage, and in the garage my uncle has a screen that connects to all of his security cameras, so he saw her as she was walking up. He was already walking out the side door when Cheryl threw the brick. He watched her do it, and was less than 20 feet away from her when she did it. My uncle, being the guy he is, immediately drew his gun and told her to get on the ground. He's not a police officer, but he is former military, and he's the kind of intimidating that you don't want to mess around with. From what I was told, as soon as she saw the gun in my uncle's hand, she immediately got down on the ground and just stayed there. Apparently, he had scared the hell out of her and she was terrified that he was going to shoot her. From there, Anne called the police and they came. My uncle told them what happened and showed them the camera feed. Cheryl was arrested and subsequently charged. I wish there was more of a happy ending for me, but there wasn't. I didn't get my job back. I went back to school and went through a month of being searched every single morning. After that, I moved on and just stuck to myself and those I knew were close, like Anne. Honestly though, I didn't really mind that things didn't go back to perfect for me. Cheryl got caught doing something that was super illegal, probably got the scare of a lifetime from my uncle, and I honestly hope that this was the point where she decided to turn her life around. I have no idea what happened to her, and I honestly don't want to know. I just hope that Cheryl and I never meet again. I apologize in advance since I'm not a good writer, but I'll do my best to share my experience. To better paint the picture, here is a description of myself at the time of this incident, 3 years ago. 5'5", 26-year-old woman, medium length bleach blonde hair, curvy 175 pounds, wearing black high-waisted tights and a pink crop top. 3 years ago, I was walking home late at night from my friend's house. It was dark, and at the time I lived in a rough part of a large city. I've had many sketchy situations that I've gotten myself out of, so I guess I felt sort of invincible, like nothing truly scary could happen to me. When I walk alone, I always stay very alert and aware of my surroundings for my own safety, just in case. About halfway home and roughly 10 minutes to my apartment, I noticed a van started tailing me. I was used to this since in my city it's very common for a young woman in a rough area to get propositioned for sex. It's embarrassing how desensitized to this I was. I did my usual and crossed the road so that I would be walking beside the traffic heading in the other direction. I wasn't scared, just annoyed. The van then turned down a side street, then back onto the road I was on and pulled up to me. At this point, I still wasn't scared. Again, this has happened so many times, and it never mattered if I was wearing something that showed more skin, or if I was wearing a winter coat zipped from just below my chin all the way down to my ankles. That area is notorious for that type of activity. I decided to be firm and told the person sternly, "I'm not interested." I noticed there were 2 men in the van. They looked almost identical and may have been twins or brothers. Both men had a very, very dark complexion, dark eyes, and short dark hair. The van didn't move. I was super annoyed and crossed the road again to get away. At this point, I figured this would be enough for them to stop following me. They didn't. They kept circling back every time I crossed the road. I've never had to put that much effort into getting a horny pervert to leave me alone, so this is when I started feeling unsafe. They zipped by me at the speed the traffic was flowing in, and I yelled for them to knock it off. I thought it finally worked. It had been 3 minutes and I hadn't seen the van, so I thought I was in the clear. Just in case, I pulled my phone out and was getting ready to call my sister that I lived with. Just then, the van pulled up to me very quickly, and before I could even blink, one of the men jumped out of the van, opened the back door, and approached me quickly in an aggressive manner as if he was about to scoop me up and throw me into the vehicle. The traffic in that area is very inconsistent. It was dead, and I imagine that is what they were waiting for. Just as the man was about to place his hands on me, I tilted my phone and said, "You are being filmed in my live video chat. I gave my friends your license plate number and the police have been notified." I was so scared, but I didn't let that show. I stayed as calm as I could. The man paused like he was considering if I was bluffing or telling the truth, so I tilted the phone more as if to give the fake audience a better look at him. He then jumped into the van and they sped off. I have never been the same since that night. I'm afraid of walking alone now, even in the daytime. Stay safe out there. To the 2 creeps in a van, let's not ever meet. I hope karma finds you both soon. Hey guys, glad to see you made it to the end of the video. Have you ever had to deal with someone refusing to respect your personal space and boundaries? Let me know in the comments below. As always, if you have any scary stories that you'd like to be told, submit them to the email in the description, and I will do my best to get to them. Okay guys, that just about wraps up the video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So long, Fear Seekers. I'll see you in the next video.